Welcome to these digital devotionals where we walk verse by verse through various portions of God's Word. And right now we are in the book of Romans in the New Testament, specifically Romans chapter 4, which has been steadily dismantling one of our deepest assumptions. And it is this: that righteousness before God is earned. Or to put it another way, that God's acceptance of you and me is based on what we do. In verses 9 through 12, Paul presses home that her truth even further by asking a very practical question. Who is this blessing he's been talking about, the gift of God's rescuing work through Jesus? Who is it actually for? Paul asks whether the blessing of forgiveness and righteousness is only for the circumcised, that is, for those who are ethnically Israel, or is it also for the uncircumcised, the Gentiles? In other words, is this grace restricted to a particular group, or is it truly available to all? And to answer that question, Paul takes us back to Abraham's story in the Old Testament and asks us to pay close attention to the timing. When Abraham was counted righteous, he was counted righteous before he was circumcised. So the answer matters more than we think. Paul reminds us that Abraham believed God and was counted righteous. And that takes place in Genesis 15, years before circumcision was instituted in Genesis 17. That means Abraham was declared right with God while he was still uncircumcised. So circumcision did not make him righteous. Eventually, it marked him as one who had already been made right with God. Paul then explains that circumcision was a sign and a seal of the righteousness that Abraham had by faith. You see, a sign points to something else, and a seal confirms what is already true. But neither creates the righteousness. They testify to it. So this is crucial. Abraham is not the spiritual father of believers because he was circumcised. He is the father of all who believe, whether circumcised or not, all by faith. And faith is not a ritual, it's what unites us to God. Paul's point is beautifully and simply inclusive. God's saving righteousness has never been limited by ethnicity or culture or external markers of belonging. From the very beginning, justification has been only and always by faith alone. And that truth speaks directly to you and to me today. We may not be tempted to trust things like circumcision, but there's other things that we can trust, thinking that that makes us right, like church attendance or being baptized or doing good things or maybe developing theological knowledge or maybe involvement in ministry. Now, see, none of those are bad. In fact, they're good and they're God-given signs, but they're never the source of our righteousness. Signs are meant to point us to grace, not replace it. So this passage, Romans 4, verses 9 through 12, reminds us that faith always comes first and obedience follows. Identity follows from grace received, not grace earned. This passage also gives us deep assurance. If Abraham was counted righteous before any religious badge could distinguish him, then our standing with God rests on the same solid ground, and that is faith in God's promise fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So today, forsake any idea that you can work your way into God's favor. Resist the urge to measure your relationship with God by some sort of outward markers, but instead rest and rely on what Abraham did, on God's promise and God's provision by trusting Christ by faith. And once you trust Christ by faith, rejoice in this good news. The blessing of righteousness is not confined to a select few, but freely given to all who believe. And may you and I, may we be marked and identified by God's grace as those who believe in Jesus.